May the words of my lips and the meditations of all our hearts be now and always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. So our summer read-through of the saga of King David has come this far, and we had a choice today between two stories of David's teen years: the story of his encounter with Goliath, or the story of his first encounter with Jonathan, son of Saul. And when we read them both on Monday, I was thinking, and I'm sorry, I know what day it is, but I was thinking, oh, his poor mother. Several of her sons have been conscripted into the army. Remember that Samuel warned them that this is the kind of thing a king would do: take their sons for military service. And Samuel warned them a king would take the first fruits of the harvest too. And there they are, needing to send provisions to the king's army gathered for war against the Philistines. And it is her baby, David, who jumps at the chance to leave his sheep and to run off to have an adventure, and then leaves his load with the quartermaster and runs off to see what is happening at the front lines, feeling invincible. And why wouldn't he? He has been anointed by the prophet Samuel and told that he has been chosen by God to be the next king over Israel. God can't let him die now. And so this headstrong, impetuous, invincible boy volunteers for single combat against the terrible giant. And of course he wins, which just confirms in his heart that he is indeed invincible. Which of course means he's going to make lots of very careful and appropriate decisions from this point on. But so begin his years of going out into battle, playing chicken with his anointed destiny as he throws himself, or rather, as King Saul throws him, into reckless battle after reckless battle, one of them hoping that he will die, and the other cocksure that he can't. It is this boy, impetuous and confident and victorious, ruddy and handsome and strong, who is brought before the king after defeating the giant Goliath. And Saul, who is no fool, sees a rival and an enemy. And his son Jonathan, who is also no fool, sees something else entirely. And I am so drawn to the contrasts between these two reactions to David, the two stories in which our impetuous young hero suddenly finds himself in the middle. And while Saul looks at the shepherd boy and fears that this boy might usurp his throne and take his place as king over all Israel, Jonathan is busy stripping off the ceremonial robes that mark him as the crown prince and heir and putting them on David. This guy should definitely usurp the throne and take his place as king over all Israel. But it seems to me that this contrast between a way of dominance and violence and power over the other and a way of deep connection and love for the other, that this contrast between father and son lies very close to the heart of something important about this God that we worship. Over and over again, when Jesus tells parables of the kingdom, when Jesus sees and responds to the weak and the vulnerable, when Jesus lays his own life down so that death can be defeated, he disrupts stories of power and of violence, of exclusion and of domination. And Jesus disrupts them in the same way that Jonathan, his soul bound to David's, disrupts Saul's violence, exclusion, and domination. with deep connection, and with love. This is the way that God has been revealing in these divine stories from the beginning. This is the way of Jesus. And this is the way that we, in our own time and our own place, are still invited to follow. And we are no fools. We can see the signs of violence and domination all around us, dominating the earth, dominating one another. And I know that it feels, at least in the short term, it feels like a winning strategy. That whole send your enemy into battles that you don't think he can win, and eventually he won't come home, but nobody will hold you responsible for his death. That plan, that's a good plan. David is going to use that later against Bathsheba's husband. In a confusing world, at least I can tell if I am winning if I know that you are losing. But this isn't the way. It isn't what we were made for. And we can see so clearly what comes of living too long with systems of violence and of domination, of failing to live up to our first covenant to honor all life. And it's hard to see a way out. And so I wonder if Jonathan and David are on to something here. That the way to disrupt stories and systems of ways of violence and domination is with connection. The kinds of connection that I find on social media, when I seek out voices that are different from my own and listen to them as they describe what the world is like when seen through their eyes. The kinds of connections that were the lifeblood of the Breakfast Club. I mean, it was breakfast, but it was also never really about the food. It was about the connections. The kinds of connections that we have made with Mary and Joseph as we all just keep waiting. The kinds of connections that we'll make in events like this afternoon's forum, learning from one another and with one another. The kinds of connections that were invited when the Muslim Society of Guelph invited their neighbors to walk with them, to contribute to a garden, to witness their prayers. The kinds of connections that are invited when firekeepers invite all who pass by to pay their respects or to receive healing from a sacred fire in the center of the city. Or when First Nations, Inuit, and Métis invite the city to participate in a day of dancing and drumming and storytelling to mark the solstice. Connections that are forged out of shared laughter, shared joy. Connections forged out of our common fears and our common griefs. Connections forged by singing together, by dancing together, by breaking bread together. God, how I miss community suppers. In this weary and broken world, it often seems like what we need are more David and Goliath stories of the mighty and powerful being brought down by the small and the clever and the righteous. But maybe what we really need are more David and Jonathan stories of two souls meeting and connecting and knowing that their futures are inextricably bound together, that we cannot be rivals or enemies, not when my joy is your joy and your sorrow is mine. Because this way of connection and of love, this way of love, this is what we were made for. Thanks be to God.